What's up everyone, Scott the TroutHammer here, back with another top 5 video for you guys. Today I'm going to talk about my top 5 favorite ways that are completely different from what you probably would expect or are experienced with to rig a Senko. These are all going to be pretty oddball, mad scientist ways to rig a Senko, ways you probably haven't even thought of that are a lot simpler than you think, including one way that turns a Senko into a crankbait. Now, I really don't have a true favorite way to rig a Senko off of this list, so I don't have it arranged like I normally do with favorite going from 5 to 1. I have it arranged this time in terms of difficulty, how easy it is to set it up, and how much more time it takes to set up the rig from 5 to 1. I've got a whole playlist of these top 5 videos. If you guys haven't checked that out, I'll put a link for it up here. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down there and the notify bell next to it, so you're going to be the first to see all the great content that's going to come from this channel. And when you subscribe to the channel, I'll give you a shout out in the video I record over the weekend.
Yep, you saw me. There you go, guys. That's a fish. There you go, guys. That's unreal! Oh, this is such an awesome looking fish. Oh, yeah! Alright, guys, check that out.
So when you think rigging a Senko, everyone thinks the more traditional ways, you know, Texas rig, Carolina rig, wacky rig, Nico rig, what have you. These are going to be ways that you probably have the gear available to you in your tackle box, and you never thought to rig a Senko this way. That'll be completely different, something a bass hasn't seen before. And of course, bass being a very curious species of fish, when they see something they're not familiar with, they have to come up and touch it, inspect it, make sure it's food, but they don't have hands, they have a mouth. They have to come inspect it with their mouth, and that's when you have a chance to hook up on them. Now, when I say Senko, I really mean stick bait. I am gonna, use and demonstrate all of these rigs on the original, the Yamamoto bait Senko, but it works on any stick bait, whether it be the Yama-senko, Yum Dinger, a Savage Gear, Armor 2, whatever you have. So number 5 on this list is going to be using a nail weight in the back. Now, here is a weightless Texas rig Senko. It's one of the most common, one of the most effective ways to rig a Senko. And the way you retrieve this is as you cast out, you let it fall all the way to the bottom, and a lot of times you're going to get that strike, especially from the bigger bass, once it goes all the way to the bottom, because they're sitting there on the bottom, they see it enter the water, and they're just sitting there waiting for it to come down to them, and then they just come out and slurp it up. And then if you don't get that bite once it hits the bottom, you retrieve it back, giving it a couple twitches and pauses, and it's going to twitch up and act like a soft body jerk bait, and then it's going to fall back down. But here's one of the things about the way this is rigged. When it's rigged like this and it falls, it's going to fall straight down, or it's going to fall nose first because the weight of the hook is toward the front. And when the bait fish start dying off, especially in the winter, if you want to effectively fish a Senko in the winter, this is a modification you need to make. The bait fish, when they start dying, they actually fall tail first. If you ever watch fish die off, like a shad die off, they actually start falling tail first. Even when they twitch, they start falling tail first. It's a modification that I've recommended people make to their jerk baits if they have suspending jerk baits or sinking jerk baits. The hard body jerk baits is to put a little adhesive weight near the back so the tail is what falls first. And this is a way you can make that modification with the Senko. So you want to take a construction nail, something that's really light, because you really don't need a whole lot of weight for this modification to be effective. And you just want to push that nail into the tail end of the Senko. And I say construction nail because they have those grooved edges that'll help hold this in the plastic a lot better. And now you have a very small weight on the back of your Senko, so when you twitch and it starts falling in, it's going to start falling tail first. That's just a quick, easy modification to present something that fish are actually a lot more familiar with seeing, especially bass, when bait fish start dying. My number 4 modification, and this actually is one of my favorite ones. I'm surprised I see so few people doing this. It requires a pair of scissors, and you're going to turn this into sort of like a hula skirted Senko. So all you want to do is you want to take some scissors and you want to cut the Senko tail into 4 pieces. So by the time you're done, it's going to look like that. Now, the reason why this is so effective, no matter how you rig it up, whether it be Carolina rig, Texas rig, weightless Texas rig, my favorite way to use this modification is the secondary action you've now created with the end. When it's falling and when it's sitting stationary, those things are still moving around in the water. It simulates the little minute fin activity that bait fish make when they're stationary. It's one of the reasons why skirts are so effective with jig fishing, is because those skirts are moving. It's that secondary action, not primary action, the secondary action while it's not moving that tells the bass that that thing is alive, it's food, and it's vulnerable. And then if you have this thing rigged up on a shaky head jig or on the next jig that I'm going to show, it makes it even more effective with that secondary action from those little simulated skirts that you made on the end. In a nutshell, I always keep a Senko that I modified this way in my tackle box just in case the bite gets tough and I need just a little something extra to entice the bass to bite. So number 3 on this list, and this is the way I promised that turns your Senko into a crankbait, is with a swinging head jig. Now, a swinging head jig is a football head that has a little keeper on it that allows you to put a EWG hook or worm hook on the end and allows it to swing freely. So there is a specific way you want to rig your Senko up like this because you want to be able to have that hook in the front swing freely. You don't want to put your plastic too far up on the bend of the hook, so you only want to go through a small portion of the Senko to make it effective. So I'm only going through maybe like a fifth of an inch. So you slide that up to the front and then rig it up how you normally would with a Texas rig style hook. And you'll notice that you'll have a little bit more body in the back of the lure instead of in the front or main body of the lure. And that's actually really critical to how this is going to work. So you see how that's rigged up? It's going to swing freely with the Senko, the plastic itself being further back on the hook. Now again, using that Hula one I explained, this is how this turns into a crankbait. If you're fishing an area that has a rock or gravel bottom and you let this sink all the way to the bottom and start retrieving it, that football head jig is going to bounce off of those rocks and the plastic is going to deflect behind it. You run this thing like you do a crankbait. It's now a fast way to run a Senko that turns us into a reaction lure and not just something that sits in the water or falls to the bottom and then has a couple twitches. It's a fast moving reaction lure just with this simple addition. And again, using that Hula on the back, you're going to have a little bit more action when this thing deflects and that Senko is going to kick off to the bottom, and it's on those kicks that the fish are going to react and come strike it. So number 2 on this list, and this is another one of those ways that you probably never thought to rig a Senko up this way. It requires to have the tools available to you. You already have to have these things purchased, but it's to add an underspin or a tailspin to your Senko. So these things are those screw lock keepers. You can buy these things in bulk by themselves. It's going to have a bunch of extra screw lock keepers just in case you have to replace any that you're already using on your rigs, but it also allows for modifications like this, and then get some packs of small Carolina blades or some willow blades. And what you want to do is have this thing rigged up weightless Texas style and come in at an angle on the bottom. That way that screw lock is going to go into the body and not come out the top. Screw this in. And now what you have on the bottom while this thing is slowly falling is you have something that's kicking, creating flash, displacing a little bit of water. Again, secondary action. Something bass are going to look for that's going to trigger them into striking. To turn it into a tailspin, again, requires a little modification. You want to go for the end of the worm and you want to clip about the last 1/4 inch off so you have a little bit thicker of an area to screw that into. And then same as with the underspin, just go right for the middle and screw your screw lock in, and now your Senko has a tailspin. So if you want to retrieve this thing a little faster, it has something that adds just that little extra something to draw bass in, but even while it's falling slowly, it's going to look like a paddle tail of a fish that's just sitting there vulnerable, secondary action of a tail fin motion that bass are used to seeing of a vulnerable meal, and it'll draw them in even more so. But don't let just that Texas rig style stop you. Like I said, get mad scientist with it. Put one on both ends of a wacky rig. Watch what happens. If you really want to freak a bass out for something they have to come inspect, or if you want to draw them in from an even further distance on the fall with the wacky rig, you now have 2 spins on the side that are just kicking a little bit, providing a little flash. That's secondary action I'm going to keep talking about. Now for number 1 on this list, this is the one that requires the most setup, the most preparation to do it effectively, but especially with the Yama-Senko, one of the biggest things about the Yama-Senko is they don't last long. These things have so much salt packed into them, they last maybe 3-4 fish if you're lucky. They tear up so easily. But what if I show you a way that will not only make your Senko last longer, it'll increase your hookup ratio? You interested? It requires a treble hook, a baiting needle, and a pair of pliers. Okay, so here's how you set up with this, and I'm using a high visibility line so you guys can kind of see. Here's what you need the threading needle for. take some of your line and put it into the threading needle. You want to go with about a couple inches behind the needle so you can grab your line while you do this. And then you take the front end of the Senko and you want to go in through the front and come down at an angle through part of the body. So you're kind of going to go maybe an inch or two through your plastic and then down through the bottom. Take that baiting needle all the way through, pulling your line through. So you see, now you have some line that moves freely through the Senko. On the end of the line that's coming through the Senko, tie on your treble hook. So you see, line coming through your plastic, treble hook on the end. Now here's where the pliers come in. One of the barbs on the hook, doesn't really matter, pick which barb. You want to use the pliers to bend that barb down. In a nutshell, you don't want one of those barbs to really snag and stay on anything. So then you want to have just a little bit of wiggle room on the line coming through the plastic and take the barb that you bent down and stick that into the Senko in a way that it keeps the hook as close to the body of the Senko as possible. And that way your line is going to be tight coming out of that. So you can run this thing like a soft jerkbait like you normally would with an EWG hook. You can twitch it and it'll still twitch just as normally, still fall just as normally, or let it fall all the way to the bottom because that's when you're actually going to get most of your strikes, especially from bigger bass on a Senko. And now you have two exposed hooks with the treble hook. That's how you're going to increase your hookup ratio. Now here's the disclaimer about this. You're very much losing the weedless properties of a Senko, so you want to fish this in more open water or if you have just no vegetation in the area you're fishing. And now here's how this will actually extend the life of a Senko. When you hook into a fish, what's going to happen, that barb isn't going to keep that part of the treble hook in the plastic. It's going to come off. This is going to slide up the line, and you're fighting the fish by itself. It turns your Senko into a line-through plastic. There's a way, like I said, to increase the hookup ratio with the Senko, extend the life of a Senko. You'll probably land dozens of fish this way. Again, it just requires a little more time to modify. So that's my top 5 ways to modify or rig a Senko that you probably never thought of before. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought about my ways, and if you guys have your own ways, talk about them down in the comments below. Again, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down there and the notify bell next to it so you're going to be the first to see all the great content that's going to come from this channel. And other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, tips up, tight lines, and have fun fishing.